Have all the goodies been priced into this market? Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Romaine Bostick.
And I'm Alex Steele. And now we know what happened yesterday. Everyone bought and went on vacation.
That is right.
That's exactly what went down. All right, we're kicking you off to the closing bell right here in New York. So the S&P is up 0.2%, but volume kind of goes nowhere. It was clear that sort of a lot of buying kicked in yesterday. I know everyone's on that early break. S&P Energy is the best part of the index for the S&P, up 1%, as oil prices also continued to climb. There was some drone attacks by Ukraine in Russia on refineries, so that's sort of crimping up the market a little bit. Bitcoin up 66% so far in this quarter at a record high, and a 2-year yield up by about 5 basis points. A big move this quarter for the 2-year, about 37 basis points there, Romaine.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about a lot here at the end of the quarter.